Good evening. Welcome to the May 16th, 2011 Prince George's County Board of Education Fiscal Year Budget Work Session for Fiscal Year 2012. Before I begin, please turn off your wireless communications as they tend to interfere with the taping of the meeting. We do not have public comment scheduled for this evening's meeting. This is a board budget work session. Ms. Dent, please call the roll.
Mr. Armwood.
Present.
Ms. Boston.
Present.
Mr. Burrows.
Aye.
Ms. Eubanks. Ms. Higgins.
Aye.
Ms. Johnson. Ms. Waller. Mr. Harris. Mrs. Beck.
Aye.
Ms. Jacobs.
Here. Thank you, Ms. Dent. The Board of Education has convened this evening for the sole purpose of discussing the fiscal year 2012 budget as proposed by Superintendent Dr. Height. This year's budget process increased challenges due to the following issues. It is important to note that with the economic downturn striking every possible organization, corporation, and business, no one has been exempt, including Prince George's County Public Schools. The recommended budget has been forwarded to the county executive, Rashawn Baker, who then developed his proposed county budget and presented it to the county council on March 15, 2011. The county council has been reviewing our budget. They must adopt the budget, which includes the school system budget, with the county's budget, and it's designated by its category by June 1st, 2011. The Board of Education will then have an opportunity to reconcile our budget in a plan scheduled to be adopted at our regularly scheduled board meeting either June 16th or June 23rd. Tonight, Superintendent Height will provide a brief overview of the fiscal year 2012 budget. Before I yield to Dr. Height, we know that over the past few weeks we've heard differences with regard to the legislative session and what that might mean for the school system's budget. We know that some of the highlights included reinstituting some of the funding, but also designating pension costs to the local school board districts. In many ways, we had expected that that might go to the local counties. At this time, it looks like it's going to go directly to the Board of Education of local counties in the state of Maryland. With that, I yield the floor to Dr. Height and Mr. Stansky for its overview and submission based on where we are today. Dr. Height.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members of the board. Today's focus is really to provide the board with an update of the FY12 proposed budget. And some things have changed since we submitted the board-approved proposed budget, FY12. We're happy to report that we were able to acquire more dollars from the state. And so the state did provide us with $13.8 million additional dollars, and that's been offset to a small degree by the shortage in funds that we received from the county. But nonetheless, we're happy that we received those additional funds. However, all of that additional revenue has to be measured against the 40-plus cuts that we proposed, the 40-plus cuts in excess of $100 million. And so what we're attempting to do tonight is provide the board with an update, and that update will include the revenue picture, and the revenue picture that has changed since we sent the proposed budget over to the county, the status of the proposed cuts, and as the board knows, as the board remembers, we had several cuts that were proposed, and if additional monies were restored, we would try to address those in a priority fashion first. Other changes that we could be expecting from the state, some of those things could be pension costs, administrative costs associated with benefits. We also would like to give the board an update on our retirement incentive and how that worked and how that will work in this process. We will provide a brief update on our reduction in force tonight as well, and we want to provide some direct information about Read and Recovery and how we will deliver that support and service in the event that we're unable to restore that full amount, and specialty center transportation. I will add that earlier today, Mr. Stansky and I were, and Mr. Armwood, who was there with us as well, we were with the county in the committee of the whole. The committee of the whole, they were doing a budget review, and there was a lot of interest in trying to acquire more funds to address specialty center transportation, the reading recovery, at least in part, and some form of fashion looking at how we could provide more opportunities for students in pre-K to be in a full-day model. And we were talked more specifically about Head Start as an option, as a possible option that would not be as cost prohibitive, but you could add some additional class spaces with that. So that's where we are, and that describes the presentation. I'm now going to yield to Mr. Stansky, who will walk us through this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Height. Afternoon, members of the board. Some of this will be a little bit repetitive from the last budget update that we had given you in April. But to start, one of the things that we would like to do with the additional revenues that we've received from the state is restore a cut of about $780,000 to assistant principals. We had initially had proposed moving elementary school assistant principals from an 11-month work year to a 10-month work year. We would like to use that use some of the funds to help restore that cut, to move them back to 11 months of work. We just feel like that additional month is crucial in the operation of a school with scheduling and actually preparing for the following school year. As we had described before, we have found a way to keep the Schmidt Center open and operating by changing the staffing formula at HB Owens and also taking some FTEs from curriculum and instruction. So the Schmidt Center will be open. There would be a small fee of $15 per student to help cover food costs if the trip to Schmidt is an overnight trip. As reported to you in April, the state will be assessing a fee per employee for every employee who's in the state retirement system. I initially in April had a cost estimate of $2.8 million. The state has now come back to us and given us the exact figure, and that estimate fortunately has been lowered to $2.2 million, but still a fairly significant additional cost that the district will have to incur in fiscal year 12. Wish I had more to report to you on the residential placements for the Department of Human Resources, but I don't. This is one that I was in a meeting with the state chief financial officers last week, that there's a lot of uncertainty around. School districts aren't really used to working with these departments. MSDE has very little information to give us as well. We do know that the full cost to impacted districts statewide is about $5.2 million. As of now, I'm going to recommend that we reserve $1 million to set aside for potential billing of these students who would be our students but are housed in these facilities. As we go through the reconciliation process, I'm certainly thinking we should be able to get more information, and I'll be able to get us a more definitive answer on how much this could cost the school system. But as of now, I'm going to recommend that we reserve $1 million for the change in law for these students. This again a repeat from what I showed you in April. Again, it's just a reminder though, that because it is significant changes, especially for all employees. The big significant change is everyone will now begin to pay 7% of the pension costs as opposed to 5% beginning July 1. And then as you see on the right, for new employees entering the school system, there are a vast number of changes for new employees as opposed to the current employees, and and how you get vested, what your payouts are calculated on, when you can retire, things of that nature. This is to give the board a brief update on the reduction in force. As you see, since we began sending letters out on March 18th, these are the classifications that have received letters. And it continues on to the next slide, unfortunately. And then moving forward, these are the remaining letters that will need to be sent out. Obviously, as we go through the reconciliation process and if things are restored, we will have to send out rescission letters. But given our time frame for implementing the reduction in force, we have to move forward with implementing based on what the board had voted on in February. To give you an update on the retirement incentive, we had a total of 625 applicants. We had 448 when the incentive was 15. When we upped the incentive to 20,000, we had an additional 177 applicants. The chart below that shows how many of those were individuals who made over 175,000, and then ultimately the approval. So we, out of the 625 applicants, we approved 541 individuals to receive the retirement incentive. Of that 541, 370 of them are making at least $75,000 a year.
Correct that. It's over 75,000,
Yes.
not 175.
Yeah. Did I say 175? Sorry, 75,000. And just to give the board an update on what our criteria was for approval and denials, and approvals were made based on salary information, primarily above 75,000, as well as taking into consideration position classifications that were being significantly impacted at FY12. And that we did have denials, and denials were based on lower salaries for positions, or positions that were not being reduced, or positions that could not be filled at a lower salary. So, for instance, if an approval meant we actually lost money, that application was denied. But however, those individuals, even though they were denied for the incentive, can still choose to retire if they want. So I wanted to talk a little bit about moving forward if we didn't have any money to restore any reading recovery, sort of a strategy of how we would implement, early reading throughout the district, and that there have to be a stronger focus from K-1 teachers on their small group instruction, continued PD on literacy teaching strategies, more use of our grant funds to help pay for workshops in the evenings and weekends for these teachers, and then a use of a variety of direct instruction, computer-based, and special education interventions that the district already provides. However, if we were able to receive a small restoration, as we were discussed with the county council today, we would take 24 reading recovery teachers, would serve as what we'd call a literacy strike force team. The reading recovery teachers would maintain their certification by working with some students, but then really they would be used to train our other reading teachers in the district. As it says in the bullet, providing diagnostic support, modeling, and feedback. And these individuals would be deployed out of curriculum instruction. So obviously we'd look at data, determine how best these teachers would be used, where they need to be, and deploy them accordingly. We did make some significant, we're going to propose to make some significant changes to our alternative education program. As you can see, for the 3 schools impacted, we have Annapolis Road, which includes a reduction of 4.5 classroom teachers, and then adding 2 FTEs for online learning, an instructional specialist, and a program coordinator, which would be moved from the portfolio schools office. Merging of Green Valley and Edgar Allan Poe so Poe would move into Green Valley, and overall these reductions would save the district about $700,000, and we still believe we can provide the services that these students need. And then finally, again, an update on the hub transportation model. If ultimately, as we told the county council today, the goal is to get enough money to restore transportation to what we currently offer now, with the idea then that we would create some sort of task force to look at not just specialty program transportation, but transportation as a whole in the district, to determine how we can best deliver those services in the most cost-effective manner possible. We will continue to move forward with a proposal of a hub model if we do not get the funds required to restore transportation. parents would more than likely have to transport their children to hub stops. Savings would come from fewer routes and requiring fewer buses, meaning, fewer drivers. Obviously, savings would be partially offset based on costs associated with positions we would need to monitor the hub sites, and also a changing of bell times on for bus layover in between schools has been modeled and proposed for several non-program schools, and those changes estimate savings of around $3 million for us. So again, the hub model is continuing to be worked on, but the focus, at least with us and the council, is to get enough funds to restore the transportation to our specialty schools in order for us to provide the service at least for an additional year until we can get a true comprehensive look at transportation in the district. And so the final slide I wanted to show is just sort of what we call the reconciliation summary based on what I've presented today. As you see, we have an additional revenue of $5.3 million, plus additional savings from changes made to staffing in alternative schools, and then potential restorations or add-backs to the budget, along with mandated payments to the state per the legislative session. So as you can see right now, if you restore transportation fully, and if we do the reading recovery partial restoration, along with the reclass of APs, the administrative charge for the retirement, and the chargeback from the Department of Human Services, we're looking at $14.8 million in add-backs. So as of right now, we're looking at a deficit of about $8.8 million, meaning we could not, given our current revenue structure, we could not support restoring everything. So that's where our work with the county council comes in, and my work with the team over the next couple weeks to see if we can identify any additional savings in the budget to help restore these items. And with that, Madam Chair, concludes the presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stansky. Ms. Boston? Colleagues, we're going to adhere to the 5-minute, 3-minute rule, just for the sake of our deliberations, and we'll continue on if we need to. Ms. Boston, you are first.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stansky. I have a couple questions, so if I can get them all into my 5 minutes. One of the things I was curious about was the transportation hub. How would students that are, I'm just trying to picture in my mind that students that parents need to go to work real early, although the hubs I saw a plan of it and they're in a lot of different schools, but how would you propose for parents to get younger kids to those hubs if, are they, if they live in the area, are they allowed to ride the,
Right. If their hub stop is in their boundary school, they could certainly get on that bus that's going to that boundary school, and which would then take them to the hub stop. But if their hub stop is not in their boundary school, the parent would be required, or a guardian would be required, to get them to and from the hub stop.
Okay. On the diagram that you have for the Smith Center, and I noticed that you had the FTEs, it was the 694, I think it was for the Smith Center at 7.50 FTEs. Are those is that the reductions to 7.50 FTEs?
No, there used to be 10 FTEs in Schmidt, so it would be a reduction of 3. Is that right?
So that number would now be about 4.5 FTEs?
No, so that's what's remaining at Schmidt is 7 FTEs. So that's how this is.
So there were 10. There were 10.5.
So there's 10.5.
And then you reduced it down to 7.5.
Correct.
Okay. How many reading recovery teachers do we have now? I know you're saying you have.
There's 79 FTEs.
There's 79, so we're
Yep.
going to retain, or your proposal is to retain at least 24.
If additional funds are identified, the proposal would be to retain 24.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Beck?
following up on Camp Schmidt. Can we see a side-by-side of where they are this year for both of these programs, Schmidt and Owens? Disaggregated by the type of employee, so the type that will be remaining, and then the impact of the costs. There's some concern that the overnight portion might not be restored.
I mean, it's there. It's just the fee that we'll have to pay a fee of $15.
Okay, so the fee would be the $15
And the schools would be
for transportation.
for transportation. We'd have to pay for transportation.
So that would also probably be on a pass down.
It would almost. I mean,
It'd be
look
like
at
a
it. Look at it
field
as
trip.
a field trip. That's,
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, yeah.
Given that employees have received the letters of reductions, have the employees at Camp Schmidt received letters reducing them that now will be turned around so that they'll remain there?
Yes, so essentially, this happened with media specialists too. The original letters that went out were simply impact letters that your position is slated to be impacted, and we'll tell you the eventual result once we get through all of the steps that we have to go through. But if in this process we find out that we're able to restore positions that were originally scheduled to be impacted, they get what are essentially not recall letters but rescission letters,
Okay.
telling them that that first letter has been rescinded and the outcome that is now likely for their position.
The staff at Camp, I realize, I hate to say this, that we're in a $1.6 billion budget environment and I'm consumed with Camp Schmidt, but the staff that are there, are they classified specifically as Camp Schmidt, or will they be subject to someone else could bump into them?
It depends on their unit, and it depends on their position classification. So, for example, in 2250, as you know, there's an entire bumping ladder.
Right.
So if they've held, all of that is subject to seniority within class and grade. But we're not bumping in PGCEA or ASASP. So it would depend on the unit and the position classification.
Okay. Slide 16, the alternative education, the three programs there. Can we see that by then and now? Because I know that those three programs were pretty robust in terms of staffing, very robust in terms of staffing. And then I'd like to see the enrollment for last year and the proposed enrollment, because there were some concerns that it was difficult for principals to get students into these specialized programs, and the staffing just really looked rich. While I agree it might need to look rich, there needs to be a better way for principals to get students into that program when they need it.
Thank you, Ms. Hathaway Beck, for surfacing that point. One of the things in talking with principals, there was not an understanding of how students were either accepted or denied into one of these alternatives. And by and large, it was because the acceptance or denial was done at the school level. So we're constructing now the process for how students are vetted for all of these alternative options.
Okay.
And it will come more through the office that deals with students and be more of a placement as opposed to an application process.
So will you have a target capacity level for these programs now, so that you will know when you are really reaching capacity?
We do, and we can provide that in the side-by-side comparison. But I think we have Dr. Coleman-Potter, I know we have a capacity for all three together, even if they're co-located.
Okay, so the two programs that you're combining, your savings will be in custodial staff primarily and administrative. Will you have?
We do have to keep a few custodial staff at Poe just to keep the building itself
Right.
looking, decent. But yeah, it's instructional staff and, you know, administration as well.
So there
of
will
the
be
schools.
one principal in the combined program?
Yes, ma'am. Well, Annapolis Roads will have a principal. Green Valley and Edgar Allan Poe will have a single principal, but we also added a program coordinator, which is significantly cheaper than a principal's salary.
Right.
And the program, if you've been to Kenmore, the ED program at Kenmore, Bowie, that's how we've envisioned that.
Okay. Okay, the council is looking for funds to target to specific areas. I don't want to draw the line in the sand, but if the council finds additional funds, then that's the board's job. I'm getting
Yeah,
kind of
but-
bristly about them finding specific funds for specific programs when I'm not seeing one of my pet programs, Media Specialists, in this dialogue of we're looking for funds for them too.
No, they were asking based on categories, number one, and two, for specific programs.
Right.
And it was, how much do you need for transportation? How much do you need for reading recovery? How much do you need to restore pre-K? So it was more along, the questions were along those lines. If we could come up with this much money to provide transportation. And they did ask a question about pre-K versus reading recovery.
Okay, so if they find X amount of dollars from a number that you've given them for transportation, that doesn't well, then they would put it in the line item for transportation.
And during reconciliation, it'd be to the board's, you know, the choice to keep that money in that line item or take it out for something else. But mind you, then anything you approve in reconciliation has to go back to them for approval.
Right. Thank you.
I have some questions, but just to follow up on one of the ones that Ms. Beck asked. On the specialty and the alternative ed, did you also include, don't we still have the court set-asides that we have to do from legislation a couple of years ago? For the placement. So in other words, remember we had,
The folks working in the correctional, or
no, not the jail ones, the Judge Nichols and I think Delegate Frush introduced legislation to require us to do set-asides based on the children who were going to court.
And we would have to protect that, Madam Chair, inside of any capacity numbers that we have now. So
So-
that would still, yes, now to understand what you're referring to, if that's let's say, I'm using a hypothetical number, let's say that's 50, then we would have to set those 50 seats aside for the purpose of,
So, yeah, so
Court
I would
set-asides.
actually like to see that because I think that has to be played into this proposal. And then also, I can't get the school locations up, but Green Valley and Edgar Allan Poe aren't that far from each other, right? So the transportation costs associated with merging
They're very close,
is
yes.
de minimis.
and if I'm not mistaken, also the court set-asides are done through the office that we would do all of the placements from inside of our
Okay.
district. Now, those are placed centrally, and everyone else is chosen at the school level, and we are talking about making all of the selections central.
Okay. And then I have other questions
Ms. Jacobs,
about-
I wanted to add to, Edgar Allan Poe is 6, 7, and 8, and Green Valley is 9, 10, but the bulk of the children are 8th and 9th graders.
Okay.
So you can see, it sounds like a middle school and a high school coming together.
Yeah.
But in fact, the bulk of the kids are within that one age range.
Yeah, and I didn't mind that so much. I understand. I just know that when we had, it may be that most of the set-asides are going to Annapolis Road. It may be that. I just wanted to make sure that we factor that in. And then I had colleagues ahead of me, so I'll come back to my other
In
questions.
fact, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, we'll include that in the side-by-side analysis so that if schools also have court set-asides, we can talk about how many they have now.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Armwood?
Thank you. I also have questions about the alternative program reductions. I know the schools are recommending students, but they still get rejected, has been my recollection by the programs, either through the interview or they're simply told there's not enough space. So we do not have enough seats now for students that were looking for placement. Yet you seem to be saying that you're not reducing the number of seats available.
That we're not expanding the number of seats, Ms.
Well,
Allen?
you're not expanding, I know that.
Right.
But it seems that you're saying you're not reducing the number of seats available? That's a question.
No, we're not reducing the number of seats available, even by combining all three programs.
Okay.
And I submit that if we did an analysis today of the number of students who are at all of these schools, I would suspect there's seats available.
Mr. Armwood,
Yes,
this
ma'am.
actually goes back in reference to what Ms. Hathaway Beck said. If you look at Edgar Allan Poe, just that one single program, consistently they only had about 30 to 32 children all year. But when you look at that in relationship to their staffing, I think that that's one of the issues that we're trying to address, is that it's actually exorbitant because they do have so many adults in the building, but they serve so few children. The same thing would be for Green Valley. For all year, consistently, when we track their enrollment, they had about 100 students. Annapolis Road, which serves the northern part of the county and another population, was more just in terms of capacity filled. But when we looked at the two of those programs, we thought just in terms of the SRC, the state-rated capacity of the buildings that they currently occupy, as well as the staffing that are supporting those programs, it was really something that we had to make the tough decision to combine them so that we could be a little more efficient in terms of those services.
Okay, thank you. And for the transportation, do you have more information on the task force you envision studying transportation, and when that study is going to conclude and who's going to participate in that study?
Yeah, we would, in fact, what I'm envisioning, Mr. Armwood, is having some industry professionals participate, county and regional transportation, and I'm thinking about representatives from WMATA, from our local county bus system, but also Public Works to really look at the structures of roads and how much traffic they can handle. We could look at dismissal times and just and the optimization, someone from optimization, whether it's using systems like that now, or creating systems like that now, or just looking at individuals who do that work and asking for someone to participate. I would like that work to begin this summer, to conclude prior to whatever our next budget start time is. And so I would like to see all of that work done and completed by September 30th, so we would have a set of recommendations for how we will do or could think about transportation moving forward. I think also really important is looking at not just transportation, but where programs are housed. Mm-hmm. And so actually looking at our centers, talented and gifted centers, our choice programs, and looking at how and where all of those programs are placed, and if they're placed in places that are easily accessible to students in all geographical areas.
Will the task force be empowered to also study the possibility of contracting out parts of our transportation system?
I think that would be another conversation, Mr. Armwood. We haven't talked about we haven't talked about contracting, just talking about utilizing the existing system or improving the system that we have right now. I'm pretty sure that that could be something that if they're tasked with, they could do, but that's not where I was thinking in terms of the task force for transportation.
We're looking to create a sustainable system, and to me, everything has to be on the table. It may not be a direction we choose to go down, but we have to look at everything that will impact and perhaps give us a sustainable system, and then go make the changes. Someone needs to look at it, tell us what are the impacts, what changes we need to make with our regulations, contracts, whatever, so that we can make appropriate decisions. With the bell changes, what bell changes are you envisioning? Are they going to be earlier, later, and have the schools already been notified of these bell changes?
I'm going to ask Mr. Dodson to address that. He was the one working with it.
Yes, the bell changes will be 12 schools that will be affected, and there's already been a meeting that was initiated by the deputy superintendent with the assistant superintendents to sit down with those individuals, let them know about the bell changes. They have concurred. A memorandum has been prepared for Dr. Height's signature. That will go out, and we'll start notifying the schools and parents prior to school ending in June.
In general, are there going to be earlier or later bell changes for the schools, or is it all over?
Yeah,
the place?
it's really not a set pattern of earlier or later because there are 12 different schools involved. It could be that 2 of them are earlier, 2 of them are later, 4 of them may be 15 minutes later or 20 minutes earlier. And it's really, the bell times are really centered around their connections to get to their other schools in a timely manner. So when we change them, we have to make sure that if we change them, it doesn't affect the time of another school.
Okay. Regarding the Schmidt Center, I understand you're cutting the staff, and I understand you're expecting the science teacher from each school to pick up the instructional part of their visit to Schmidt Center. The question I have, do these teachers accompany the students to the school now? And if the science teacher does or does not, because my understanding is a staff member, not necessarily a science teacher, will they be paid overtime for the stay? And who's going to supervise their instruction, make sure that the lesson plan is sufficient?
Mr. Armwood,
Yes, sir.
generally the whole grade goes. So the science teacher is part of all the, so if the 5th grade's going, all the 5th grade teachers go, and one of them is usually the science teacher. We're not, Schmidt will retain some staff, so there'll still be some work going on by the teachers at Schmidt, but not to the extent with the loss of positions, some of that will be curtailed. I think the most important thing about Schmidt is the transfer of the transportation and food cost from the general funds back to the schools to cover the field trip, and that's where most of the cost saving is coming.
And my question about that is, I understand what we're doing, but I think the experience at the Owens Center shows that when you transfer those costs to the school, this really impacts the number of schools that participate in the program. The Owens Center lost 2/3 of their participation, I understand, once you transferred the bus transportation to the school. What is going to protect Schmidt Center from having the same thing occur?
That will remain to be a challenge for the schools, sir. So you've correctly anticipated what we're worried about.
Okay, so there is no answer to that. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. Dr. Height, I want to give you all of my questions at one time. I'd like to preface them with, I would really prefer that rather than looking at program-specific additions where money is concerned, if we can have money applied to the system, I think it is far more important that we look at the goals of the system and that money be applied in the most effective way to get us to the goals that we've set, such as reading and math and technology, whatever it is that we have decided for those goals that you've set and Strive for 5. I am very concerned about how much do you need for this and how much do you need for that. We cannot pull the system apart by pieces, parts, and divisions. We need to do it as a system. My question is, let me give you all the questions. How many monitors do you anticipate will be needed in handling this hub system? in general, what kinds of numbers are you seeing for an anticipated savings using the hub system? Because right now it's narrative. How much money are you looking at? And what are you going to do if you don't realize that? If parents are transporting to hub centers, one, what is the map of the centers going to look like? The answer to the Bell schedule, thank you very much, we got it. And what is your anticipation of the traffic, and how are we going to interface with the traffic of people going to and from work and trying to get in and out? Just the general planning around that, but most importantly, I'd like for you to talk about the monies that it appears 10.2 state funding was added, 4.4 of which is operating budget, $9 million for school construction, which I think is wonderful, and balancing that against $162.77 annually per employee with regard to the chargeback to us, and the incarcerated youth, the cost of that, and it says must be in PGCPS the prior year. I'd like a little bit more explanation, meaning the child that is now incarcerated had to have been a full-time student the previous school year. Okay. And what are you seeing may very well be that cost. And lastly, with that now being the rule with incarcerated youth, are we looking at developing some strategies so that perhaps these young people are not going to be incarcerated? They're going to do differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. First, I'll address the ones that I can address easily. So with 47 sites, we're anticipating 47 monitors. So there's a monitor at each site. Mr. Dodson can speak to the anticipated savings, and Mr. Dodson, I'm going to ask you to put these into a group so you can address them all at once, and the traffic logistics, because we have run a mock, just kind of a mock system looking at the hub model. And then we've run an analysis on the change of bell times, the reduction of miles traveled, and so what that would cost, including the 47 monitors that we would need. So that's not additional cost. That's the cost of any savings that we realize. You're right about the $9 million in construction in addition to. We're happy about that. Right now, we do not have the guidelines for how that should be spent, whether it's renovation, new schools, or what. So once we get more information from the IEC on that, we will be able to provide that information to the board as well. And I could not agree more with the incarcerated youth. I think one of the things that we're looking at, even as we talk about the alternative programs, just looking at how we change what students experience in our system so that our system remains an option for our students, so that they don't turn away. And that is looking at everything from attendance at earlier levels to who's teaching and who's standing in front of our students. But it's also establishing those very important relationships at all grade levels, Ms. Johnson, so students feel as if they have an advocate at the schools for them. And so that I'm a key believer that incarceration is a symptom of another problem in around communities and in schools. And I think that if we get to the root causes of those problems, then we can ultimately address the incarcerated youth issue. I'm going to have Mr. Dodson and Mr. Stansky respond to the questions about specific to the hubs, anticipated savings, and logistics.
When we took a look at the projection for saving in the hubs, it came down to really two categories. One is the number of buses that we would not purchase this school year. I think that number is around 113 buses that would not be purchased. And the other is staffing in terms of bus lot personnel, the managers that would manage the bus lots or the bus depots. And if you look at the number of buses that we wouldn't purchase, it would reduce fuel as well as any maintenance that's required. So we did a breakdown of the 8 million, and then when you categorize it into what categories or line items, it would be vehicles and would be staffing that you would need in reduction, and as well as the already on the table is the number of bus drivers required to drive those routes for the specialty programs. Logistically, as Dr. Height mentioned, is the one monitor per site, 47 hubs. Ms. Johnson, you mentioned the traffic. We've done a preliminary assessment of the traffic, and we could potentially have up to maybe 50 cars, but bearing in mind with an operation like that, all 50 cars are not dropping off at the same time. So in a window of the time that the specialty bus is to leave that location is the time that you would see the parents dropping off their students at that particular location, and to address the traffic would be that monitor or that hub lead person at that location that would work with parents as well as help to do traffic control to get the cars in and out. Staff has currently gone out to those locations, the driver trainers. They've gone out to those locations, and they've already identified where the students would stand, where the buses would pull in, and where the parents would pull in to park. So we're currently looking at all 47 locations and identifying those three points. So make sure that the students are safe and there's an ample space as much as possible. Some of our schools, as you know, are pretty tight. But I think if it's really managed well, and it'll get better each day. You know, with the first 3 days you see it, it'll look like bedlam. But as the days go on, it'll smooth out.
Ms. Higgins.
Thank you very much. I guess first I'd like to say this is an awful lot to kind of take in, and it really would have been helpful to have had it on board docs. I looked as early as this afternoon and didn't see anything, so we could pay attention to those things. And the other thing I'd like to say is I really appreciate Ms. Johnson's comments regarding keeping the larger picture and our focus in regards to the education of our children, particularly with math and reading, as we make these fiscal decisions in regards to what our priorities academically are. Having said that, I have some specific questions regarding individual issues. Number one was the alternative education program. I think Mr. Armwood raised it first. We're talking about cutting 13 teachers in addition to other staff within those 3 schools. So it's based, initially the comment was because of the numbers of children who are attending those schools. I guess my question is, what types of behaviors are those children exhibiting? Because we all know if we can keep them in the county school, then that's going to be cheaper than within the state, outside of the county or outside of the state. So I'm thinking that was part of the decision making and not just the numbers. Can you speak to that specifically?
The students that go non-public are special ed placements with an emotional disturbance label.
Okay.
Many of the kids in the alternatives are really expulsions. So a lot of times they're not there for the entire year or for multiple years.
Okay.
So it's a slightly different category. These are generally not students who would be going to non-public placements.
Okay.
But they do have egregious behaviors. So the class sizes are extremely small. One of the concessions that we're going to have to make by cutting the staff is we're going to have put more kids in classes, and many of these classes are very, very small, half dozen kids. You know, so we might have to go to 10 in a class.
I've worked with those kids.
And we also might have to limit the number of options as far as electives. But remember, they don't go 11th and 12th grade, so it's really those core courses
Right.
around algebra, English 9, English 10.
So what are you talking about in terms of class size, and how many adults would be in the class with them?
One adult, we're looking at 10 to 12 kids.
Wow. Do you have a rover?
There's
Or
actually
one adult with.
Yeah, there's
I mean,
still
you
there's
need to
still a
have-
lot of crisis intervention teachers. The staffing is incomparable to the way a high school is staffed because of the number of adults.
No, I'm
that-
saying one adult to 10 to 12 children who have egregious behaviors and have been expelled for such is maybe asking for.
But there's additional staff. There's still crisis intervention, still counselors. So those staff
That's
stay
the
pretty
plan.
much. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Specialty transportation, if you look on the slide that you, slide 18, I guess this also was raised. It says that the cost of specialty transportation is $8.6 million, but wasn't it about that when we were not talking about hub transportation? Oh, the cost would be, so there wouldn't be any savings really from the hub transportation to what the original reduction was.
So the hub model is really there. So right now, we have no transportation for these programs as
Right.
as we voted on.
Yeah,
The hub model is proposed as an alternative within, I don't want to say within the $8.6 million reduction, but pretty close to be able to provide transportation if funds aren't restored.
let me ask it this way.
Okay.
The reduction, the cost of specialty transportation, the way we've doing it this year,
8.6.
I think was about that amount of money.
Yes.
So are we
8.6.
saving any money by doing it hub?
No. We are being able to provide transportation within that budget, essentially.
Within the eight, so
Within-
why would we do it by hub instead of the way we're currently doing it?
Back to 8.6. So we're not adding back the 8. Are you asking whether or not we're adding back the 8.6?
I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, so we're not adding back the 8.6. So it is a reduced cost by changing the bell schedules, by reducing the miles that buses travel, by looking at the 47 geographical places.
Okay.
We're able to reduce the cost from the 8.6.
I see. And
Any additional monies, if in fact monies were provided and allocated for such purpose, then it would likely add up to 8.6 in order to do it like it's run now. But the hub system is significantly less expensive.
Okay, and that's not shown on here because this is just showing what the original plan was.
What we took away.
All right, so, okay. So we'll be seeing that number, or is it in this document? Okay. And then the retirement incentives for the teachers, my understanding is that's pretty much going to be a wash then? We're not going to, where are we in terms of teachers being riffed?
Can you go to that chart? Oh, that's much too small for me to see. The numbers should be there for PGCEA approvals. 338, am I reading that right? Okay, so for teachers, we're trying to do a one-for-one, Ms. Higgins, so that there's a pretty close correlation to those that we're approving and those that we're going to be able to avoid reducing. That won't always be the case, though, with some other position classifications. In other words, we were looking at an overall savings of positions without any additional cost to the system. So it was sort of some moving pieces here and there because
Right.
we were reducing some classifications, but we even approved retirement incentives in classifications where we weren't reducing to be able to get the money to cover leave payouts and incentive payouts for other people. But with
Okay.
teachers, we're trying to realize as many of those 338 as a one-for-one to avoid layoffs of teachers as we can.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, right. And so we're our media specialists then, for the most part, are also teachers, so they would be included in that.
Oh, thank you. Yes, media specialists are included in the PGCEA allocation, and I believe that the net savings for media specialist in the retirement incentive was 6. So we were able, those rescission letters, we were able to rescind 6 reductions that we had previously made as a result of the retirement incentive for media specialists.
So then we will retain that expertise in our system if and when we get monies back to be able to beef those systems up. Is that correct?
If we can add additional positions with
No,
any extra money?
We have currently we have media specialists who are trained in and so integral in regards to the schools.
Right.
So if we have to do a cut in regards to media specialists, what I'm thinking I'm hearing is at least we're not going to lose those individuals who, if in a better budget cycle, we can re-add the media specialist positions within those schools, we may still have the talent. We're not rifting any of those media specialists.
We'll still end up reducing media specialists because of the size of the cut, but the retirement incentive helped us save so far 6 individuals that would otherwise have been reduced. If they have a second area of certification, even if they were reduced as media specialists, they may be placed in that other area of certification and therefore stay in the system and still be, and then we of course have the recall list, so that as we have additional attrition, we can bring the most senior person back from the recall list.
Okay. I guess what I'm not understanding is that if we're going to probably be 1-for-1 for teachers, and if media specialists are seen as teachers, why then there's media specialist RIFs? Sorry.
So the retirement incentive doesn't allow us to buy back positions that have already been cut.
Okay.
It allows us to save people who would have otherwise been reduced, because as the more senior person retires, it's
Right.
one
Got it.
fewer of the allocated FTEs that we have to cut.
Right. But they're teachers, so they'll be saved as teachers, but not as media specialists.
No, they'll be saved as media specialists. If we had a
Okay.
media specialist retire, how many do we have left of media specialists? What's the overall allocation for?
92 allocated for FY12.
So 92. So of our existing double that, we cut the 92 least senior,
Right.
okay? But 6 of the more senior decided to take the retirement
Right.
incentive. So of the 92 we already sent reduction letters to, 6 of those got rescission letters and will actually keep their jobs.
Right.
But we still have 92 FTE.
Okay.
It doesn't change the overall number of media specialists right now that are proposed for FY12.
Okay. All right. And are we still holding at this point with the formula that has been discussed previously about how that will play out? Okay. Reading recovery. You're talking about the 79 reading recovery would go to 24. Should I wait till my 3-minute or finish? Round 2. I'll wait till round 2. I want details on how that's going to play out.
Thank you, Ms. Higgins. Mr. Burrows?
Thank you, Dr. Height. Thank you, administration, for the work that you're doing on the budget. My first question is about Camp Schmidt. I just want clarification on Ms. Beck's question. I guess Ms. Schillen, you answered Ms. Beck's question, so I guess you would answer this one. So the employees at Camp Schmidt who receive letters of, that they won't be there next year, will receive recent letters if this current budget passed.
The ones by seniority who are eligible to stay for the remaining FTEs would receive such letters.
Mm-hmm.
That's in all cuts. Anything that you restore, if an employee's gotten an impact letter, let's say it's a partial restoration, then we've got to do a full seniority ranking by position classification and determine who stays. If it's a full restoration, then everybody gets rescission
Is it
letters.
within the center, or is it between Camp Schmidt and Owen Sorensen, or all?
Everything in that position class, for 2250, that's the easiest example. Let's say there's one custodian FTE remaining. It may not be that custodian, I'm using 400, but it's the same bumping. It may not be that custodian who stays, but they get to keep one custodian, and we would go by bumping rights to fill that. That's the same for 2250.
What about PGCEA?
For teachers, it's all done by subject field assignment and the seniority in that subject field assignment, and then the system overall. So it's not a bumping per se, but at every school site, every work location, you've got to look at all your remaining FTEs for FY12 and go by subject field assignment and rank them accordingly. We have some, this is a little bit off topic, but probably a good time to announce this publicly. There are some classifications that are not tied to a certification. Reading recovery is one of them. They have some other area of certification, reading specialist or what have you. And so we are negotiating with PGCA the procedures that apply to those unique positions that are not tied to certification. So I'm dancing around the answer because it's different for every single position, how we determine what person will occupy that FTE for FY12.
Okay. And my next question goes, is about reading recovery. So I see the reading recovery early reading strategy here. I'm not sure if this is the most effective way to teach reading in the system, but I'm pretty sure our reading recovery teachers who are specialists, who are tried and true, who have produced results that we've looked for, I'm pretty sure they could best design a model on how we could continue early reading. My point is that I'm not sure if they had an opportunity to give you feedback on this, but I'm pretty sure that, I mean, they're experts in their field. I'm pretty sure that they would be able to best design a model to best teach students how to read early on. And if they didn't have any input in this, I would appreciate if you were to send this to them for comments, for feedback, and allow them to say this is what works. I mean, they're experts in their field. And so that's my second, well, it's more of a point.
The proposal was actually done in consultation with folks in CNI, and some of the folks actually do represent reading recovery. The literacy strike force, the balanced literacy workshops, many of those workshops are actually conducted by reading recovery teachers. And they were very effective, but due to budget cuts over the last couple of years have not been part of that. It's our hope with this proposal that those reading recovery teachers will still be available to do those balanced literacy workshops. We are also really trying hard to keep their certification. So we're going from, 78 to, so the proposal goes 78 to 0. So in order to keep your certification, you have to continue working with students. So what we tried to do is come up with a plan that could provide reading support, but still allow the reading recovery teachers some opportunities to work with kids so that their certification is, stays intact. So that's the thinking. Is this the most effective professional development? Perhaps not. Is it the most effective intervention for individual kids? No. So what we're trying to do with this proposal is to try to keep try to keep reading recovery alive, try to keep a cohort of teachers certified, trying to leverage their expertise in the balanced literacy workshops, and trying to help provide audits to schools in regional areas and real support in how they're doing their reading. So Mr. Burrows, I have some real concerns around the fidelity of guided reading, the use of the early reading assessments. Some schools use them, not all schools use them. Some schools use them appropriately. Those schools need a lot of support, and we think that this is the cohort of teachers who could best provide that support without them losing their certification.
Okay. And my last question is about the hub model. This hub model looks very similar to the one that we've received time after time. And did we receive, I asked administration a couple board meetings ago to send this hub model to the PTSAs to see if this was something that could work, if they had any comments, had any feedback on how to make it better. And I was interested to see if the administration actually reached out to the PTSAs that this would affect, and if their recommendations were something that we were able to use to make this current proposal better. One of the things we are doing, Mr. Burrows, is reaching out to not all PTSAs, but some of the parents who are participating in some of the specialty center programs, just to take a look at the model, just to get their input on the model. We will have that information available at the next workshop, budget workshop. But by the same token, we were trying to devise this plan. It is not like the plan you received previously, because that was a hub that had students dropped at common places. So there were malls, there were churches, there were corners, there were different places identified. This has students, this is utilizing existing schools as hub stops. That's one distinction from the previous model. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows. Dr. Height, I wanted to sort of try to run through my questions before we do round two. I cheated a little bit because I jumped in earlier, but I apologize. On the state pension issue, I know I asked this question before, and it may still be unresolved, or it may just be that we can't do it. Is it still true that we can't affect in any way the employee contribution?
That is true.
Okay. On the juvenile services costs, I know you're still working through that as well, but is it at least clear that it's not going to be the full per pupil cost that we have? It will just be a cutout based on the education?
It's the state portion, yes.
Just the state portion?
Just the state portion.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, if I may also add on the pension part of this.
Yes.
And probably most of the board members have seen this, there is a proposal out by the President of the Senate to really look at this whole notion of pension in the fall, in the special session in the fall. And so I'm saying right now, it's no place to have employee contribution, but that could all change subject to anything that comes out of the special session.
Okay, and I just think that even if it were, the employees are taxed enough as it is, I get that part, but at the same time, generally, employee contributions also mean you can affect it's an investment, so you can get more than what you would normally be allowed to get. So I just think it needs to be on the table for discussion. On the pension, do you know if the new formula is for all state employees, or is it just for teachers?
Yeah, it's all
all
state employees. Yep.
Or all people who are in the state employee
All
pension
people who are in the
system?
county employees,
That are
school
in the
system
state
employees,
pension?
state employees, yep.
That's
It's
what I
all,
wanted to know.
everybody.
Okay, and then on the reading recovery and early reading strategy. So, Dr. Arbogast, you're the chief academic officer, so I actually trust that you are an expert in this area as well. And I guess my question would be, can you give like some data, for example? Clearly, we know what the data shows in reading recovery, but so this would change the way things happen if we were able to get some funds to save some of the reading recovery teachers. But can you give like some data, general data across sort of like the country in terms of how reading happens and how the success rates happens? What I mean by that is, so I don't know the processes. I don't know exactly how it should happen, whether it from first grade to second grade and third grade, but knowing that we have different models to assist in reading, even if you can't say this is exactly how it's going to happen, can you say if we follow this type of model where specialists like reading recovery teachers are doing this work with reading specialists, that these should be the outcomes, that we know that if this is what's provided to students, this is what's going to help them read. And one of the things that I guess the stressor for me is just not knowing how it will work, and not just how it would work, but also based on this new proposal, are we going to be able to service more children? Do we know that? Are we going to be able to give more to more kids? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And I'll try to, I won't respond exactly in the narrative that you asked, but let me try to put a story to it.
Okay.
With our latest MMSR data, readiness for kindergarten, you saw pretty dramatic gains, and we were in the 70s this year. We did an early reading assessment of kindergarten students in January, and about 90% of our kids were within a range that's acceptable to learn how to read. 90% in January of kindergarten, drops to 59% in January of first grade, and stays in the high 50s or around 60% by the end of second grade. So it's real clear to us where it's falling apart. Why middle first grade, and what's the power of reading recovery? Up through kindergarten, concepts of print, some phonemic awareness, understanding letters will really work for you. But by the mid of first grade, you have to put it all together. There are cueing systems that we use when we read. And the cueing systems are, you have to know what the sound letters mean. Mm-hmm. You have to know how our language works. And you have to understand that print takes meaning. And you put all of those pieces together. So when it's putting all those pieces together is when things fall apart. What we know is that, well, I'll step back. There are urban districts who believe very strongly in a very scripted, structured approach. If we teach vocabulary every day this way, and if we teach phonics every day this way, that you'll get a bump. And they do get a bump, but it doesn't necessarily increase. That's not what Reading Recovery believes. Reading Recovery believes that all those cueing systems that I mentioned have to work together, and it takes a very skilled teacher to know which cueing system the student is using and which ones they're not using, and what's the appropriate question.
So they can target that.
What's amazing about Reading Recovery is a Reading Recovery teacher responds to every syllable that drops out of a student's mouth, and they respond on the spot. It's real-time teaching. So we need that kind of capacity, that kind of intellect, that kind of reading expertise across every first grade teacher, every kindergarten teacher, and every second grade teacher. And I'm not convinced that we have that level of expertise. Obviously, we don't have Reading Recovery level expertise, but I'm even a low level of proficiency. So if you walk into a first grade classroom in February and you see a first grade teacher in front of a class of 24 students just talking away, that is not going to that's not going to close that gap that we have of 59%. It is working with individual students and small groups of students in level text. And when I say level text, that means text that's not too hard or not too easy, right at that student's level, and then responding to every syllable the students make so that the teacher knows what the next question is. That's pretty intensive professional development. Now, who's responsible for that professional development? Our reading specialists. Every elementary school has one. But you know that they're doing their own interventions, and they're doing test coordination, and they're doing a lot of the duties that keep schools running. And the most powerful duty they need to be doing is working directly with teachers, and they can't always get to it. So if you asked our supervisor of early reading, she would say that the perfect reading teacher day would be partially providing direct interventions to students and partially working directly with teachers. But they're pulled in so many ways. So this proposal is to deploy folk from the CNI to actually do audits in schools, meet with the principal, because the principal is an integral part of this. The principal needs to know what they're looking for when they walk through these classrooms, and they need to hold teachers accountable, and we need to provide those professional development opportunities. So I don't know if that completely answered your question, but Reading Recovery has shown us what excellent reading instruction can look like. It has shown us that, and then we have to try to mimic that, and I'm not convinced that that's what we're seeing in our classrooms on a day-to-day basis.
And part of that is because, I mean, Reading Recovery has such a limited number of students that they work with based on their certification and the way that program works.
That's true. But Reading Recovery is based on Mari Clay's work out of New Zealand, and it's really, Mari Clay, I think, opened our eyes to how children pull the cueing systems together. I know, as I learned about it, I completely changed how I thought about kids learning. And I used to think that kids would learn like in this hierarchy, you know, you learn this and you learn this. And that's not, it's much more holistic, much more dynamic, and much more dependent on the adult reacting to the student and providing the appropriate support and the appropriate questioning and moving that student in the right way. The other missing piece, Ms. Jacobs, if I could, is guided writing. And we know that guided writing and reading are absolutely linked. And I'm not sure we're seeing enough guided writing in our K1 and 2. So we're working real hard, meeting with principals, to say that 60% proficiency in mid-first grade and 60% proficiency at the end of second grade is unacceptable.
Okay, so I'm probably going to run out of time, but just two more questions, I guess, related to that. And I'm struggling just out because I really do want to understand it and how it's going to end up impacting our kids. But so does this new proposal, what is that? How does that play with principals who using Title I funds? Will they still? So let's say you're able to keep 24. Could they still buy more through Title I if they wanted to?
Yes.
Would that still remain?
Yes.
Okay. And then I think I heard Ms. Schilling say that we're not sure how that will be determined if that ends up being the case, because you don't know if it's going to be it'll be based on seniority, I assume.
Yeah,
Or-
so at some point in time soon, We need to know the whole universe of the reading recovery teachers that we are keeping, because then they'll be ranked based on seniority, and if it's 24 most senior will remain.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Boston?
First, I want to follow up on this, on the reading recovery. I understand what you're saying, and it's good. But with these larger classrooms, how are we going to? It seems like to me that if it's a teacher, it's almost impossible for them to actually to give that focus to every child in that classroom. If they got children, if they got about 28, 29, and I've been to some kindergarten, first grade classes where there's almost 30 kids in there, and we're actually cutting back on the paraprofessionals that they can have in those classrooms. How can we realistically evaluate the teachers, or hold them responsible for actually touching every child? Or I just think that's just my opinion.
Yes, ma'am. And when we raised class sizes, we held harmless K and 1 and grades 3, but we did go up by 1 in grade 2. But you're right, there's enough variation from school to school that you could see classrooms anywhere from 18 to 28, 29, 30. The other piece to remember is management of an early grade class is more than just knowing how kids learn to read. It's that whole management piece. So you could be the best reading teacher in the world, but if you don't have the management to handle large classes, all that skill just drips away. So that's actually part of good reading instruction is how do you structure your class. And if I'm a teacher and I'm meeting with a group of 6 students, what are my other 23 kids doing or my other 22 kids doing? And how you answer that question really depends on the power of your reading block. So the management, you're absolutely correct. The management of a early childhood class is critical, just as critical as the skill around reading, and the kind of activities that children are engaged in when they're not directly in front of the teacher is really, really important. So in a highly effective first grade, you're going to see a lot of word work. You're going to see kids making words with tiles. You're going to be seeing kids writing books at their desk. What you're not going to see is a lot of worksheets and just rote things. That might keep kids quiet, but it's not moving them in the right direction.
Yeah. And that's if you have a perfect class where you have no behavior problems, you have no special needs kids in that class. Okay, let's move on from that. What I'm interested in is there was a little bit of conversation about that pre-K model that I think you spoke about earlier, about trying to move that formula or looking at some kind of way that we can kind of include that with the Head Start, or at least look at that discussion. Can you give me a little bit more detail on that, please?
So the question was asked at the council meeting when pre-K came up as a topic. What if funds were restored to get more children back to full day, how would you best use the funds for the purpose of pre-K full day? And so we Head Start, we had said because obviously Head Start serves the most neediest 3 and 4 year olds. And so we thought, $1 million would get us probably 8 or 9 additional classrooms of Head Start because you have a teacher and a paraprofessional. But so that was just, obviously we told them it's a $10 million price tag to restore it all back to everybody going full day again. But that if some partial funds are restored for the specific purpose of pre-K, how we would structure it is probably structured as a Head Start classroom. So that way you're serving the most neediest children, and that you can, we can do it full day.
That it makes sense because it's the same formula for both pretty much, isn't it? Because you have to be economically at a certain level to even enter pre-K.
And we already have an existing structure for it.
Okay, yeah.
So we don't have to create something new. The structure is already in place.
Because the curriculum is almost the same,
Exactly.
isn't it? For pre-K and Head Start.
Yeah, but Head Start is more intensive and more costly than running straight pre-K. That more services are provided through Head Start.
Thank you.
Mr. Armwood?
Thank you. I want to continue on Ms. Jacobs' line of questioning regarding reading recovery. there's no question reading recovery is successful and it does what it's supposed to do. But I think what we're working towards is a sustainable program that not just addresses the first and second grades, but is a benefit continuing on through their elementary school education. I've been told by individuals that by the time their child got to third and fourth grade, they were back to not being able to read. I've heard that there are studies that show that the gains made through reading recovery are not sustained because you're not able to maintain that level of intervention for their entire elementary career. Am I understanding correctly, and will our new plans for reading help address that ability of sustaining their achievement?
I think the data is actually mixed on that. There is some support that say that, in fact, reading recovery gains are sustainable, and there's contrary to the evidence, too. I think the critical component is what happens when the student leaves the reading recovery setting, and what's the quality of teaching in first grade, in the first grade classroom when they're not in reading recovery, and what's the quality of teaching in second grade and third grade. So I think those children can be very, very susceptible to poor quality teaching in second and third grade, and that's where I think you might be seeing the gaps. So there's no question we have to increase quality of reading instruction through all the primary grades. If money were no object, and if you're looking for the optimum, you would see, as Ms. Boston said, small class sizes, highly trained teachers, reading recovery as one of multiple options around interventions. The interventions in second grade would look different than the interventions in first grade, and the interventions in third would look even different. And what you would have is you would have extremely flexible grouping. As students performed on pre- and post-test or assessments, they would move in and out of these groups, and you would have kids reading all the time, and the total school structured around reading. So that would be the perfect reading elementary school. Multiple interventions, including reading recovery, small class sizes, highly trained teachers.
Thank you. One other quick thing before I have another question. How does reading translate directly into their writing proficiency?
It's huge, and I'm going to start before reading as language. So what we know is students with limited language ability really struggle to read. Vocabulary is so essential, and it's your speaking vocabulary and it's your experiences that are so essential as a precursor to reading. And then reading and writing, actually, I want you to think about those as going hand in hand. Don't even think of them as separate. And reading recovery does that. The guided reading and guided writing and reading recovery puts them together, and that's really what you want to do. So, yes, without language, reading is very difficult, and writing is very difficult if reading is tough. So you want to see all those pieces together.
Okay. A comment about the media specialists. We need media specialists, but have we, or do we have a program where we can train volunteers to come into the school and help schools with manning their libraries? We're always looking for volunteers, parent participation, and I believe there's a big audience of parents who would love to come in and volunteer and help. Do we have a program, and rather than principals having to invite people who don't know what they're doing in, is there any way we can develop a training course for volunteers to come in and help out schools?
We can certainly look at that. You'll notice that many volunteers do work in the media center. It's a good place, and you see a lot of kids, and they can be a huge help to media specialists as they're trying to maintain their stacks and volumes. We can certainly look at that. The important thing to remember about media specialists is they are much more, they have their hands on much more than just the media. And that's an
I do realize
important.
they're teachers. We're not going to replace teachers. But some of the concerns of having someone available to sit with a child in the library, to help read, help them pick out a book, that type of thing. There are many people who can help with that on a much lower level. One more question. with Head Start and pre-K, we're going to combine, or we're going to implement a Head Start type program. Will that depend on any federal funding? And what are the impacts of the federal cuts that are pending for Head Start?
So the additional Head Start classrooms would be actually funded by the county and not by the federal government. I am next week hoping and planning to give in the budget work session next Monday the board an update on the federal cut, all the federal cuts, not just Head Start. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns with this stuff right now, so I held it off for this week to push it to next week to see if we can get more information regarding it. We do know that stimulus for Head Start, there was Head Start stimulus funds that obviously will be going away June 30th that funded classrooms. There has been talk, although by the federal government, of reinstituting some of that stimulus money strictly just for Head Start. But for the most part, Head Start was saved from the cuts, but there's programs like Perkins, Smaller Learning Communities, which we'll talk about next week, that were not saved. And then obviously moving forward for the FY12 budget, federal fiscal year 12 budget. So these cuts were just fiscal year 11. And it was kind of odd because it happened 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year. I'm seeing confused faces. Federal government fiscal year 11, county government fiscal year 12. So when the federal government then, they run on an October to September fiscal year as we do July to June. So the FY12 proposal that's moving through Congress now will potentially have impacts for us in FY13. So I'm hoping to give at least more information to you on federal cuts in our next presentation on Monday.
Ms. Johnson?
The very first question kind of goes back very quickly. With Edgar Allan Poe taking that program to Green Valley, what's going to happen to that facility? If you don't have any plans or information now, that's fine, but I just want you to, I'd like to know what's going to happen with that facility. How do we foresee using it? With regard to reading, acquisition of knowledge across time. Once reading the, printing press, children learn to read. Now, in Miami, they have a major thrust teaching parents to read to their children so that children begin to make the connection between the sounds that mom, and they also have a major one with dad reading to children, connecting the sounds with what mom or dad is holding that has print on it. It has made a huge difference in the numbers of children who are deficient in reading going into pre-K or Head Start. The other point is that all Maryland certified teachers have to have credits in reading. And it's not for their reading, but it is for them to be able to identify the reading level of children, the needs of children who may be demonstrating some reading issues, connectivity between author's purpose, a theme, etc., to identify to help children through that. It's got to be they got to put those skills to use. That's why Maryland State required it. The other point is that with regard to reading as an initiative, no, it needs to be a core of the work that we do, because children who are deficient in reading, I would say, beginning the end of definitely first grade, they're going to struggle through life. We have all just heard the report. 44% of all adults in the city of Detroit are functionally illiterate. They didn't just get that way. It was built over time. And so I would say to you instead of us looking at a program called Reading Recovery, it is far more important that we identify what is happening with children in America, in society, and begin to build on those things that are going to make our children skilled. I really have concern about the reading.
You need it, just, no response? Ms. Higgins?
Thank you very much. I just want to say the obvious, which is this is not a conversation anyone likes to have. This budget process is obviously going to have a negative effect in terms of our children. So, I think that's a given, and I think we can all agree that it's not a pleasant conversation or anything we want to applaud. I guess I want to go back to reading recovery, and I think some of my other colleagues asked questions, so I don't have as many. But if we look, I know in the past when we've talked about reading recovery, we've said that it impacts maybe 1,000 to 1,500 children. And I know Ms. Jacobs was asking, with this new plan, how many children? I think in the past we've thought that there might be 4,000 children in our system who struggle with reading. So how many children do we think will be able to impact with this literacy strike force? Hypothetically?
Reading Recovery gives intense support to 1,000 kids. We can't, this model would not give that intense support to 1,000 kids. It just won't happen. And our goal would be to increase teacher capacity across all schools.
To impact broader kids in a
Yes,
less intense
but
way.
I think it would be disingenuous for me to say, oh, I think this plan will take care of the other 4,000 kids. I think that would just be disingenuous.
And how many Title I elementary schools do we have?
About 45, 40, mid-40s.
Okay. And so there is the possibility that the principals would choose to do reading recovery in those schools, which would be the direct intense services.
Reading Recovery, and many of them will choose literacy coaches. But what many Title I principals do is actually go to Ms. Boston's point, they reduce class size. They add extra teachers to get those class sizes small. That's what a lot of Title I principals do.
Okay. I just want to say that the principals that I've spoken to, et cetera, thought that the idea of being able to offer schools the field trips in order to go to Camp Schmidt, thought that was a very good possibility, and had options for those students who are lower income within their schools to be able to do that. Class size, holding, all right. We talk about these are what the class sizes are, and then we have a general conversation about how much larger than those class sizes some classrooms, they don't hold to the class size. Have we talked about how much it would cost if we hold firm on what those class sizes are supposed to be? So we say second grade is supposed to be what?
I can tell you the class size increase proposed in the budget that was approved is $18 million.
I'm sorry, say what?
$18 million.
I don't know what you mean.
So to restore class size to what they should be is
I'm sorry, I'm saying, what is the class size supposed to be for second grade, for example? The new class size. Or pick a grade. I'm just using it as an example. Okay. All right, 24. And I guess what I'm saying is we don't keep to 24. We creep up because we've had other people talk about those class sizes are larger in some of the schools. What would it cost us to hold at 24?
Oh, to keep a maximum of 24?
Whatever our class size number is that we don't allow, we put in more teachers or more school classes to deal when they get to 28.
Yeah. I can't answer that right now. I can certainly get that back to you, but it would be substantial, I can tell you that.
We do that historically, Ms. Higgins, we've done that with classroom balancing. That's what we call it. We call it balancing, and we hold aside some of our FTEs, if you will, or positions, to fill those or to address those classrooms. The problem with the budget that we propose is it does not have any of those positions that are held aside. And so it would be much harder now to do classroom balancing. Now it would be more of a mechanism that moves individuals from schools with low class sizes to balance out those with high class sizes. And we haven't done that in the past. We generally give more staff. And for every, I would approximate for every 15 teachers we would hold aside, that's $1 million.
So our plan then for fiscal year 13 would be that if class size increases by, I don't know when we would consider it a problem, but then we don't really have additional teachers to pull in there. We would have to pull somebody from another school.
From another school with smaller classes.
How many teachers did we have to use for balancing this year?
73.
Wow.
We actually, this year, we actually created a formula that when a certain grade reached a peak, we would automatically get another teacher to reduce class size. And I don't have the dollar figure, but it was explosive.
6 million.
Yeah. So it was.
Sober.
It was 6 million, but we made a conscious decision not to pull from under-enrolled schools. So, like as Dr. had alluded to, in balancing, when you don't have that pool, you tend to pull from the under-enrolled schools, the FTE, to cover the higher-enrolled schools. We made a decision because we got this extra $6 million from Education Jobs Fund to hold harmless the school. We didn't take positions away from schools. We only addressed schools with high class sizes.
That's
Because, and honestly, the only reason we were able to do that is because the federal government came in with the extra money to do it for us this year.
But to Ms. Higgins' question, for my own clarification, but we're not talking about doing anywhere near what happened last year when we had to, with the increases, because that was a disaster at the AP levels and high school. It was just crazy. You're talking about targeted classes, right? At the middle school, which is already, and the middle school is already our lowest enroll in terms of class sizes, correct? Okay. Ms. Beck? Just want to make sure.
Okay, so the follow-ups from tonight will be available before Monday? I don't want to commit
When
you.
would the board like them available?
I'd like to see them at least before the meeting.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's possible for your team.
Yeah, no, that's Friday's
Friday?
fine. And given that the next session is the following Monday, I already said we'd give an update on federal grants. I'm just, I guess, looking for some direction on what else you'd like to see. Because we won't have any definitive word from the county yet as far as what.
But Ms. Hathaway Beck is talking about the side-by-side comparison.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we'll have that.
Yeah,
When will we have the council piece?
I think they vote on the. I think they're scheduled to vote on the 26th.
I'd like to see more of the pre-K plan. In terms of, you said $1 million to put children in for full day. Is the current plan still to do half day? And then if we get $1 million each, then put in. I'm a little confused as to what the overall plan is. So that can wait till next.
Yeah, but just for clarification, so Head Start would remain full day.
That's right.
And $1 million in Head Start, because it's an expensive
Right,
program.
it is.
Plus it includes transportation, but it would purchase 6 to 7 classrooms. And we would have 6 or 7 additional Head Start classrooms.
Can I ask follow-up? Yeah, but currently, aren't there about 4,500
Ms.
kids in
Higgins?
pre-K? So then how many, then we're still talking about for everybody else but those 6 or 7 classrooms, we would have half-day. So 6 or 7 classrooms at how many in each class? 20, is it?
Yes.
So that's how much we would buy back per $1 million.
$1 million is roughly servicing about 120 to 130 students.
Okay. All right.
Full day.
So, but for everybody else, we're still talking about half-day pre-K.
I'm sorry, can you start Ms. Beck's 3 minutes over, please?
Thank
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry.
No problem. We're all colleagues, and I get my time back. Okay, I'm just going to go through mine so that they're all follow-ups. Middle college costs. I know there was some discussion that in the table we received in the middle of March, there was 1.1 million in transportation, and that there needed to be some revisions or corrections, tweaking to that entire table. And also, can you add a line on what, if this is a partnership with Prince George's Community College, what are they contributing? Or are we just doing all of the financial piece? Number 2, overtime. We received documentation about overtime recently. What is the strategy with the administration on containing some of that overtime? It would seem like at some point it would be more cost-effective to hire supplemental people than to be paying time and a half. Number 3, ROTC. I know that the ROTC instructors got their letters, and I have some confusion about ROTC. The board saying that we preferred to have it in each school, and then the secondary school reform package referenced the military science by cluster. So is that the direction we're going, or are we keeping it in each school like the board really wanted to see? Number 4, reading recovery teachers. Can we add that to the then and now? So we see where they are in every school, not just their home school. Because I think the list that we got initially just listed the home school. So I have a reading recovery teacher that's home school is Marlton, but her half school is Mattapanai. So I'd like to see the then and now by school, every school. And I need some kind of clarification as to the reading recovery teachers that were classified as resource teachers and their bumping rights. So if a reading recovery teacher is now a resource teacher, do they bump back into being a classroom teacher? Or if there are no resource teacher positions left in the system, then what happens to a teacher, a resource teacher with tenure who wants to remain in the system?
They'd be seniority ranked in their primary area of certification, which under our collective bargaining agreement is defined as the last subject area taught before going into that resource position.
Okay, so if they were a classroom teacher prior to being a resource teacher, then they would bump with their seniority back into being a classroom teacher.
Primary area of certification.
Okay. Number 5, the middle school formula, there were some issues relating to the balancing, and I know that occurred in the French immersion and the Montessori programs. So the formula that we received, the 22-to-1, how is that being massaged to, or is it, to ensure that they can offer the classes they need to offer? The balancing act for middle school formula. That could be a follow-up. I don't need that now. High school, the high school IT. The high school IT initiative, which in year 4 has about 300 students. Are those students enrolled by lottery or they're enrolled by boundary? Which I have a concern if they're enrolled by boundary. And then how does that fit into secondary school reform? And then the final one would be the Queen Anne discussion. There was an article in the Gazette that said the board had approved, or the administration had approved, the move of foundations to Queen Anne, and that was a little premature because we haven't done that yet.
That was reported, Ms. Hathaway Beck. We had not announced that we were moving.
Right.
That we have approved a move for Imagines to move from their current site on Brown Station to Queen Anne's.
Okay.
They're negotiating, and we have to do a UNO, a use and occupancy review, and approve that prior to that becoming official.
One final. Do we have projections by school for August? And then can we get that every Friday report? Is the projections? We're not doing every Fridays until school opens.
And once we get through graduations and after rollover, then we begin the every Friday report.
Okay. I think it'd be helpful if we could see that every Fridays, because some of the projections were wildly off. And principals were saying, I don't even know how this projection looks like this. And then the effect of the half-day pre-K, because some schools are losing that entire component of their enrollment. And I think that it's going to be helpful to watch the shifting in terms of the really small schools that we're looking at.
Right, and we're actually in the window now where principals can actually tell the pupil accounting department whether or not they agree, what's their documentation for not agreeing. But we are really holding them as closely as we can, and the projections are typically 95% correct, so we're trying to make sure that we're not counting phantom children, that they really have good documentation for giving us a reason for increasing their projections. But we are in that window right now where they can make that petition to pupil accounting.
And if they win that petition, then then it has to go into the formula for staffing. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Okay, so that concludes this budget work session. I just want to go over calendar a little bit to see where we are. So if the council doesn't vote, or you think they're scheduled to vote May 26th, and it comes back to us. Okay, so we have to have our reconciliation completed and done by June 30th. So right now we have another budget work session scheduled for Monday, May 23rd at 10 o'clock. That meeting will primarily be dedicated, I guess, to the follow-ups from today. Okay. And then we have a CIP FAB meeting scheduled for June 15th. So that's about a 2-week window. So by then, we should know what the council has voted on. So that meeting should be very, very productive. All transportation questions should be answered. All reading recovery questions should be answered. All outstanding sort of what's hanging out there should be answered to the extent that it comes to the board, and then we make a decision on what's going on. So the board meeting is scheduled immediately after, the day after the CIP FAB. So it would be really helpful if as much information as you get between May 26th and June 15th that is already forwarded, so we're not trying to digest that information. And not just to the board, but to the public. So, and then we need to do an announcement or something that says, here are the final numbers, we know what we got, and so the public can start to digest it as well and know what we got coming. Anything else, Dr. Height, on scheduling, or am I missing anything? Okay, just want to make sure. So as it stands now, we're going to meet Monday, May 23rd at 10 a.m. It will be live television so that the public can view if they can't be here. Obviously, it is a work session, so it's not public comment. Is that correct? Okay. And also webcast. So we encourage everybody to tune in and see the different budget work sessions. And we're going to make June 15th also an extensive session with regard to that. Anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, we are adjourned at 7 p.m.